Hey friends, it's Pastor Scott, and we are continuing with our True North study as we align our hearts, our passions, our loves with the loves of the heart of God. St. Augustine, a 4th century Christian bishop, made this statement. He said, "God has made us for Himself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in Him." And what Augustine was talking about there is this idea that if we are made in the image of God, it means that if we go out seeking anything in the world and try to fill our life with other things, it won't quite fit. That there is truly a God-shaped hole within our spirit that only rests when we rest in Him. And that really is the theme that Pastor Tim was inviting us this week to think about in acts of solitude and fasting and pushing away the noise of the world and truly learning to rest in God. There's been incredible amount of practices throughout the centuries that Christians have used in drawing near to the heart of God. Last week we looked at reading Scripture, but also things like prayer, fasting, journaling. Some of those key things that really allow us to just spend time in God's presence. And really not just giving our worship to God, but actually those times of listening. We think about that if prayer and journaling and worship, those things are acts of communication with God, then we need to also intentionally build times in of listening and just being in the presence of God. We find it even in our reading this week. Be still and know that I am God. That's hard for us as Americans. Be still, to just simply be in God's presence. And really this is one for those of us who are in the evangelical church. It's hard for us. We're very much about being and doing. We're very much about what are the things that I can do for God. But what about those backing up and just saying, how about I just be a person in the presence of God and allow Him to fill me and to renew me. Those are the practices that we're going to think about this week. So in your life group, there are discussion questions where you're going to think about some of these practices. A few of them might be kind of new to you. These are things that in the Christian tradition are often called contemplative practices, where we just intentionally find times of quiet or solitude or rest and letting the Spirit of God renew us and refill us. It may be something that your soul is longing for. Practices of fasting, Sabbath, quiet, those kinds of things. So I invite you to really think about, how are you wired? Perhaps this would mean sitting quietly at a kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a journal in the morning. Perhaps it's finding an afternoon time to go for a walk in nature, putting on headphones and listening to worship music and just being present with the Lord. There's not just one way of doing these things. These are ways that you can connect. But one of the things that I want you to think about here is we modern 21st century Christians are often caught up in the next big thing. What's the latest book or the coolest thing or something that a podcast mentions? Well, sometimes the ancient ways are the best. The old-fashioned ways of just sitting down, reading the Word, prayer, fasting, journaling, practicing Sabbath, those are ways that God can just calm our hearts and allow us to give space back to Him. Here's one of the things that I'm doing this year, and I would invite you to check this out. This is a journal called Daily Kairos. Kairos is a Greek word that means not just a moment on a calendar, but a sacred moment. And the idea is to invite God to have a Kairos moment with us each week. And in this journal, it has an opportunity where each day I can look at a scripture to memorize. There's a place for talking about gratitude, writing out a prayer, taking some moment to reflect on what God is doing in the morning and the evening. So I encourage you to check that one out, or maybe just get a blank journal at Walmart or Target or wherever. But for me, that's something that I'm inviting God's presence into my life in this way through a daily journal. And I'm going to be doing that as a practice throughout the True North study. So yeah, I'm doing this as well. And so I would invite you to take that along with our practices that are there right on the back of your handout that you have. This week we are looking at focusing, hearing God over the noise of the world. specifically by hearing God through prayer, meditation, focusing with journaling, taking time for Sabbath and pulling away from the world, and then also unplugging, turning off notifications on my phone. You know, those are the kinds of things that I can do to find some Sabbath moments. And I know this is a challenge. You're busy. You've got family. You've got priorities. You've got things that you have to do. But can we prioritize that time with the Lord in a whole new way? And by doing that, can we find what Augustine is talking about? Resting in Him and finding rest for our souls and allowing our heart to connect with God in a whole new way. You'll find that in your scripture reading this week, there's some passages here that I think are really important. Some from the Old Testament, some from the New Testament. Some of them talk about the practices that Jesus had. We are told several times in the gospel that Jesus made it a habit to be alone with the Father in a time of prayer. If Jesus needed it, I should say that we probably need it as well. And before He went and ministered to the disciples or to the crowds, He made sure that that was part of His day. We also find passages in the Psalms that invite us to rest. There's an incredible passage in Isaiah chapter 58. I encourage you to read the whole chapter that talks about the kind of fasting that God desires. It's really an interesting passage in thinking about fasting, Sabbath, pulling away, and inviting God to work. So the readings for this week are very intentional about thinking about ways in which we can rest in God and connect with Him in new ways. So I invite you to lean into that. Now, another book that is in our gathering place, and some of you are familiar with this one already, John Mark Comer, who was a pastor in Portland for a number of years. Now he lives in Southern California and is writing and resourcing the church on spiritual formation practices, has a wonderful book called Practicing the Way. If you haven't read it, it's there in the gathering place and you can pick it up. Like the book we looked at last week, it also looks into habits and practices. If that's something that is new for you in some of these contemplative ways of journaling, this is a great book to kind of get into those types of rhythms and practicing those habits that form us to be more like Christ. All right, that's where we're going this week in True North. We're inviting God to slow us down, to minister to our souls in a very deep way, and inviting Him to form us to be more like Christ. God be with you and your group as we seek to draw close to Him.